There are two kinds of printing that I know a good deal about. One of them is block printing, and one of them is photographic black and white printing. In photographic printing, if you're printing an image such as this, if you don't withhold some of the light from the dark areas and increase some of the light to the light areas, you'll wind up with an image that's very unsatisfactory. One of the things that block printing has in characteristic to as a characteristic that's similar to photographic printing is that, again, you must increase the pressure to increase the tonality of a print and decrease the pressure to lighten up the tonality. Another similarity is that they each print in reverse. Now, when I made this design, for example, which is taken from an antique Etruscan design from Italian fabric, a thousand or more years ago, I forgot to reverse my drawing. So while the man is milking his goat with his right hand, when I made my print, he's milking with his left hand, so that's my left-handed goat herder. Prints like this would be printed on large sheets of fabric and used for wall hangings, tablecloths, draperies, or things like that. One of the few that I have left is this one. The design was taken from the antique Northwest American Indian or Alaskan Eskimo designs. It was taken from a wooden box. A similar design runs through all of that culture. The blankets, the fabrics. This one was printed and made into a sports shirt. Well, I didn't personally make the sports shirts, but I printed the material. Now, the best way to print material for shirts or dresses is to lay the material out flat on the floor, and it needs to be on a somewhat resilient surface. I had a room that had a large, thin carpet on it. I could cover that with newspapers and lay the fabric right on the carpet. Ink the blocks, and then step on them. Now, a big block like this, for example, would require all sorts of stepping and stomping to make it print on the fabric. I don't have many of the sports shirts left, but here are a couple of them. As I mentioned, even your fingerprint is a relief print. Now, actually, any natural object that has an uneven surface can be inked and can be printed. And I made a number of what I call leaf print pictures. The Brownie troops and the Girl Scouts used to ink leaves with a soot from a kerosene lamp and print them. This is a more elaborate development of the same thing. These are actual maple leaves, Japanese maple leaves. These are actual stones. The way the trunk was printed was to tear a newspaper, separate the two sides slightly, and then run the ink on a roller up the crack between them. I made a lot of those. They can be colored with watercolors afterwards, and all sorts of rather attractive compositions, both large and small, can be made that way. When I was doing the block printing on fabrics nearly 50 years ago, the linoleum that was available then was called ship's linoleum. It was a thick linoleum with a kind of a gunny sack back, and it was fairly soft and creamy and fairly easily carved. I could keep it warm enough to carve more easily by putting it under these lamps. That's the way that blocks like this were cut. However, after vinyl was invented, there was no need for that, no commercial need for that type of linoleum, and the manufacture of it ceased. What's available for block printing now is not nearly as good. It's much harder. It tends to chip and flake when you cut it, and it has to be warmed up considerably to be manageable. I do that by putting it on a warming plate. For the kind of block printing I've done in recent years, I usually use several blocks for one picture, so I can keep several on the plate, and as fast as one cools, I can take the next one off and cut it. Now, if it's kept fairly warm, and then kept sort of warm under the lamps, I can usually work, this hasn't gotten quite warm enough, I can usually work with very long cuts. And keep swapping from one block to the other. Now, a different block has to be cut for each color. Printing in oil colors is not only lots of fun and an intellectual challenge, it's also a rather economical way to go about creating an art object or a picture. The oil pigment paints are available in the art supply stores. However, the material that they call extender, and I don't know how you can make a print without using some extender, is something they very seldom have. But anything that's sticky and oil soluble can be used. This is an acrylic painting medium and a linseed oil, what's called plate oil, which is made for printing. We are going to make a red poppy, and so we will start out with some red paint. Now, for this demonstration, it may not be possible to do it as carefully as we would do for all the finished prints, because the viscosity of the paint sometimes has to dry a while to get it to be sticky or tacky enough to work, to transfer with the rollers or brayers. When the block is cut in the first place, it's a good idea to leave a supportive ridge around the outside. And when the paint gets on that, of course, that usually needs to be wiped off. The paper then is tucked into the corner of the printing press, if you want to dignify it by that, and pressure is applied. Now, the amount of pressure will determine how intense the color is on the paper. In order to keep it keyed from one sheet to another, I make a little mark. And now this establishes the first color on the paper. Now I would keep on in this way until I'd made about 6 or 8 or 10 initial impressions, pretty well determined by the amount of workspace that's in front of me. All right, now our next color may well be some of the green for the leaves. Now, the natural poppy leaf has a pretty strong bluish tint to it, at least most varieties do, and I'm going to put a little extra blue in this. Now, again, this is really mixed too fresh to be as tacky or sticky as I would like it to be. Now this bud should have a little of the color of the flower in it, so I wipe off a little of the tip of that bud. And now this color can be added to the first. Now, flat areas, uncut flat areas, usually require a lot of pressure. In fact, frequently require 2 layers of paint. All right, this is a reasonably good image.